Tai prašau.
Please be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Virgilijus Poderys. I am chair of the Seimas Commission on Energy and Sustainable Development. I will be moderating this discussion, seminar, conference, whatever we call it. Now let me start this event. It is titled, Does Free Fare Public Transport Promote Sustainable Mobility? As far as I understand from the future presentations and from the audience, there are different positions on this matter. Some want to have a comfortable city, mobile city. Others care about fuel balance and low pollution. So this discussion is not going to be only about free fare transport. And I think that we should discuss this issue in fare-free transport in the context of sustainable mobility and climate change. Sustainable energy, clean energy was the top issue in sustainable mobility and climate change. Now, renewable energy and its prices have become equal to those of traditional transport, traditional fuel. And transport is another area that is widely discussed. Countries, especially in the EU, have undertaken to reduce pollution in transport, and there are some financial discipline measures to ensure that. So we are speaking not about only values, but also about financial benefits. I believe that today's conference is very important and should be rather interesting. Now, before giving the floor to my colleague Tomas Tomilinas, I would like to remind you that this conference is broadcast online. It is being translated into Russian and English. So I would like to ask you to be slow with your presentations so that the interpreters have time to translate your texts. The website of our commission will give access to all your presentations. The first part will be devoted to presentations, and we will have a coffee break, and after the coffee break we're going to have a discussion for questions and answers. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tomas Tomilinas, one of the enthusiasts of this topic. He is member of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania.
Thank you, Virgilijus. During my brief welcome remarks, I'll tell you who is a true enthusiast of this topic. First and foremost, let me express my appreciation of the fact that we have a very provocative question on the table today. A fare-free transport is the issue that has been debated for many years now in Lithuania. We have chosen this topic for the conference, we have invited guests, and we are grateful for them to that. a free service of public transportation in Lithuania or in Latvia. By the way, I have just returned from the seaside in Latvia, and fare-free transport in all the countries is often associated with poor quality and with a service that does not create any added value. It is also associated with the wish of the passengers to have free services. But let me remind you of some pieces of the history. Some services, in the long run, some public services have become free in the 19th century. In the 20th century, probably there have not remained any countries which provide healthcare services for their public citizens, because free healthcare services is a universal right. Well, of course, all the countries face with the challenges. We have to discuss whether this important area should be accessible free of charge for all groups of the population. We have to talk whether we have to pay for the public services, for the public transportation for everyone. Well, it is assumed that the public service does not create any value. However, this has been denied. We have many stereotypes in our society. And sometimes people believe that services provided by the public sector are of low quality. I believe that this is the stereotype that we have to fight with. We now have to talk whether we have to develop fare-free transportation services as a priority area. Currently, fare-free transport is not a priority in Lithuania. The state provides certain grants for railway passenger carriers, but we have to ensure more fare-free public transportation services in order to ensure that we meet environmental targets. To conclude my welcome address, I'd like to note that Mr. Marius Markevičius is the person who is behind the demolishing of the myth that public services are of low quality. Mr. Marius Markevičius is the key initiator behind this conference, who brought together specialists from both Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. His work has not been assessed in terms of money. It has not been evaluated, but we are all here contributing to the public good. This conference has brought a number of experts from our brotherly countries, Latvia and Estonia, and I believe that this is the value that does not have the expression in money. So I wish you every success and looking forward for very interesting discussions. After the welcome address, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Gauče, who is the representative of the European Platform on Mobility Management in Lithuania. As far as I understand, she will talk about the concept of sustainable mobility in general.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to express my surprise that on Monday, which is the most hard day of the week, we have such a wide audience here. I would like to be as much unbiased as possible as my discipline goes. Mobility and its management is more than public transport and much more than pricing. I will try to overview all the topics, and I will start by saying that be careful what you wish for, and I will discuss different aspects of sustainable mobility, and will explain how it affects traveling habits. I know I find it difficult to use technology, and I think that we should not speak about am I too silent? I will discuss the main problems, and I will be asking you on whether public transport should become fare-free. So the major problem here in this area is noise. So you can see the numbers here. They are too fast. They are rather old here. When we speak about startups and about our future, just to remember how many schools, secondary schools, fall under the noise. So, leaving the noise and pollution aside, and even safety for all the road users. In road accidents, there are a lot of people who there are a lot of road accidents in Vilnius. Infrastructure is not evenly fitted to everyone, and there are people with special needs. And these are people of different ages who have pets, people with different disabilities, people with mental problems. So infrastructure is very important here, and it is not fitted for half of Vilnius dwellers. And this is a very important factor in determining people's mobility independently. Today, in the biggest cities in Lithuania, the cities are fitted for young, active men who are not afraid of using bicycles, who don't have children that need to be brought to schools. Now, when we speak about money and health, this weekend I had a very unpleasant understanding when my friend had a problem that when she had a program on her watch, and she didn't cover the target that she has set of 5,000 steps every day. So this leads to different health problems. Overweight problems are related to that as well. Concerning the income, the part of income that is used for transport is considerable. Scientific research says that families with cars spend 15% of the income per capita. And if they don't use cars but other alternative means of transport, the expenses are 4 times smaller. So these are the problems that we face. So my question is, how should we address those problems? And whether fare-free transport is a way out. I like to stress the fact that mobility is not transport. Well, sometimes we hear people say that bicycle is sustainable mobility. And sometimes in a very unsafe road, cycling is actually an extreme means of transport. Mobility is a characteristic of potential for mobility and use of transport as communication. And if people are able to choose different means of transport on different roads, this is sustainable mobility. There are certain constant rates, for example, the rate of travel, the duration of travel, and expenses, but there are some variables, for example, the length, the distance, the speed, and the structure of the travel. I believe that in terms of sustainable mobility, we should not have a task of bringing as many passengers to public transport. Actually, our aim is to change the structure of travels, to make people stop using cars and move to alternatives that is cleaner, safer, and more healthy. Public transport should not be advised for people who walk by foot. This is not a way out. For example, in Germany, studies showed that fare-free public transport can increase the flow of passengers. And pedestrians and cyclists stop going on foot and cycling and move to public transport. So you have to be careful what you wish for. Now, sustainable development is something which should be also discussed. Economic cost effectiveness is something that we should have in mind. I am too fast as far as I understand. Public transport should not be considered the best solution. There are 10 topics covered by sustainable mobility. And there are certain areas that don't require many considerable expenses. For example, there are certain measures, the improvement of conditions for pedestrians are not very costly, and they contribute to sustainable development. We can invest less and achieve much more sometimes. Now, speaking about public transport, this is not my area of interest, but some doctrines are well known. I'm not good at planning transport, but reducing expenses by reducing transport fares, the cost of transport fares. There are 7 measures and 7 areas where the reduction of fares will not be a solution. The transport has to be speedy, reliable, frequent, convenient, easy to use, safe and clean. And public transport does not contribute to that. And in some cases, additional lines could not solve the problem. Public transport should be speedy, reliable, frequent, and convenient. The new generation that we have now are mobile, but many of my friends cannot cannot download different programs on their telephones, and don't know how to use those applications. Could the transport be as clean and safe if passenger flows increased? I have my own opinion, but I will not voice it. I think that public transport is important in investing in 5 or 7 areas. I think that public transport should become convenient. Access is very important. When I used public transport today and I ran, I wanted it to be cool and not hot because I was carrying my computer. So bus fare was not that important compared to the convenience. And for example, there are some places where public transport cannot be used. And for example, commuting to work, public transport cannot always be used. Safety, for example, when you go to a bus stop and you know that nothing can happen to a person, it is much more important than the price that you pay for using this public transport. And this is related to installing cameras, shorter distances, and many other things, and good pavements for walking. Now, speaking about fare-free transport, I chose certain circumstances why public transport is not always attractive. And the guests of the city can comment it better. I had some examples of fare-free transport, cities and towns. But this list of towns and cities in Europe and around the world, and this list does not reach 100. and it is more often in small towns, with the exception of some cities, where fare-free transport is provided for certain age groups of people. Dotations are used for public transport in some countries. In countries where public transport is not popular, for example, former Soviet countries and South America. Germany, Poland has some cities. United Kingdom and Belgium has some cities with fare-free transport, public transport. And passenger flows have increased in those countries, but the number of people using cars does not decrease. Well, this actually change is in the area of cyclists and pedestrians. General tendency is that where transport is fare-free for certain groups, the reaction is the same, because taxpayers pay, while this is being used by certain groups of people. So some pay and others use. And those who advocate for capitalism are not in favor of that. There are many cases with fare-free public transport. It becomes not fare-free. For example, when something is fare-free and then it is being changed, and public opinion actually is very negative about that. For example, a new line is built for buses or underground is used for free for a certain period of time. And this is clearly communicated that this public transport line is fare-free. German scholars say that the flows could increase by 30%. We can increase demand by 4% if we reduce the expenses and costs by 10%. So if we are aiming at increased volumes, we can think about the reduction of costs, or at least partial reduction of costs. I don't have much time, though I'm very fast. You have 2 minutes. If we speak about effectiveness, many studies shows that different measures that don't require much investment pay off. But high investment measures understood as investment, they will never be cost effective, and this should be understood as a necessary measure without paying off. If we speak about free public transport as a measure, its territorial effects would be great, but it would have some technical, non-legal barriers. public opinion would not be favorable. This would be a measure that would be much criticized and discussed. The economic effect would be very low. The duration would be rather short term. People's habits do not change that fast. Certainly, some social integration benefits can be found here. So, as you can see, free public transport is not the way out, not the most successful measure. So, the best solution here is a more stricter car parking policy. For example, in Riga, car parking costs are very high. And this helps to change the habits of travel. And my last slide and my last point is that it is not only cities and towns that have public transport, there is some intra-urban transport. And for example, public transport between different towns and cities is more costly compared to using a car. So in the Lithuanian context, the wide zones that you can see are not densely populated. And public transport is not the solution there. Well, I've nearly made all the conclusions. I just wanted to make one point, is that in Lithuania we have a fare-free transport in Skuodas. There is a bus running from the railway station to the bus station Skuodas, and it is fare-free. And I wonder how it is being evaluated and seen by people. I don't know whether I've made some insight into the discussion. I'm sorry for being too fast.
Thank you, Kristina. I believe that your task was to fairly look at the arguments for and against fare-free public transport. Having listened to the presentation by Kristina Gauče, I'd like to give the floor now to the representative of the Ministry of Communications and Transport. Let me give the floor now to Mr. Marius Pakėnas, Chief Specialist from the Road and Air Transport Policy Group of the Ministry of Transport and Communications of the Republic of Lithuania. He will provide us with, position of the Ministry as well as his own point of view on fare-free transport. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Since we have foreign guests, let me have a look at the general system in Lithuania. In this slide, you see the population in Lithuania, and these are the major centers of Lithuania, and the number of people who live in those major Lithuanian towns and cities. The biggest cities are Vilnius, Kaunas. The smaller ones are Klaipėda, Šiauliai, and Panevėžys. These are the major transport hubs in Lithuania. Public transport in Lithuania is of three types. It's either local urban, local suburban, and long-distance transport. The previous speaker talked mainly about the urban transport. When it comes to providing fare-free transport services between the cities, so such initiatives are not sufficient. The urban transport is considered to be the transport that is providing services in the territory of one municipality according to the set route. The suburban transport is the transport that is provided between the two municipalities. And the route of the line may not exceed 50 kilometers. The long-distance transport is transportation of passengers on the routes that are longer than 50 kilometers, and these are the routes that are within the territory of the Republic of Lithuania and which cover the territories of more than two municipalities. Usually, those services are provided by local companies. Lithuanian towns usually are rather small, therefore it is the case that sometimes one company provides public services for several towns. Here you see the network of interurban routes in Lithuania. For some areas, providing transportation services are more difficult than for others. When it comes to the planning of public transport, we have several institutions that are responsible for that. First and foremost, we have the Lithuanian Transport Safety Administration and the municipalities. Both these, the Lithuanian Transport Safety Administration has to ensure the long-distance transport as well as the local or suburban transportation with the municipality, while the municipality is responsible for the urban transportation and suburban transportation. The urban public transport derives income either from the ticket price or from the compensations from the passengers who are entitled to social benefits or from the state grants. This slide shows what are the average annual income expectations when it comes to public transport. So here you see what the expectations were and what were the factual income derived from the public transport. So as we see, the factual income was not enough. Therefore, the subsidies, the grants provided by the state were not enough to cover all the costs suffered by the carrier companies. The same situation is not only with the local transport, but also with the suburban transport. When it comes to long-distance transport, carrier organizations derive their income either from the ticket price or the compensation received from the passengers who are entitled to social benefits. So long-distance carriers do not receive any grants from the state. Therefore, they calculate their costs in order to ensure that the costs are covered by the price of the ticket. Well, the information that I have provided is rather old, as you see. I have taken the data from the year 2005-2009. And these lines show the lighter color shows the income for the tickets, while the darker line showed the costs the company incurred. Here you see the slide showing the income derived by the long-distance public transport carriers. 21% accounted for the compensations from the passengers who are entitled to social benefits, while the pink color shows the share of the income received by the transport company from the sale of the tickets. Railway transport in Lithuania is not cost efficient, and railway companies usually suffer huge losses from carrying passengers. Therefore, the railway company has to cover the losses suffered from the carrying of passengers by carrying freights. This slide shows the share of passengers who use long-distance transport and who have the right to social benefits, and they account for more than 3 million passengers per year. The slide shows the change in the number of passengers using long-distance public transport in Lithuania. The number has decreased due to the fact that more and more people are starting to use their personal cars to drive long distances, as it has already been mentioned by the previous speaker that for a family it is much more expensive to use public services than public transport services than to take a personal car. Here you see the major flows of passengers traveling by buses and by trains per day. These are the travelings both directions. The flows of passengers traveling by train are lower than the flows of passengers traveling by buses. So these are the major routes, and the rest of the routes are covered by the interurban transport services provided by the municipalities. This is yet another topic. Well, maybe not a topic, but this slide shows the average number of vehicles per day traveling all those routes that have been covered either by the train or by the coach, the interurban bus. The figures, as you see, are rather huge. These shows that the number of vehicles amount to millions of vehicles. I have used public transport services myself, and sometimes in the evening I have noticed that I am the only passenger in the bus together with a driver, or maybe one more passenger in the bus. So it seems that people could use buses more frequently, because to buy a ticket to the bus costs less than to pay for the maintenance, for the insurance, and for all the things of the personal car. This slide shows what distance a personal car can cover, and which distance can be covered either in 30 minutes or in 1 hour time. And I believe that we should use more of public transport rather than personal cars. Well, Mr. Marius, you have not answered the question as to the fare-free transport is concerned in Lithuania. Well, the main issue is where to get the money for the fare-free public transport. That's the main issue. Well, the thing is that the ministry has not been against introducing public free fare transport in Lithuania, but the problem is that we don't know where to get the money from. Well, and we know more about the interurban situation rather than urban situation, because it is the municipalities of Lithuania that are responsible for providing public transport services within the municipality. But we believe that we have to ensure that carrier companies can survive. Well, fare-free public transport is a good idea, but the only problem remains is where to get money from. Well, I'd like to remind you that we will have a debate after a coffee break, so please take note, put down your questions for the keynote speakers. But as the moderator of this discussion, I'd like to make one remark. Well, we usually try to look at the figures, at the monetary expression, at the economic benefit, but we don't usually talk about the environmental issues. We don't talk how much time we save when using public transport. So maybe our colleagues from Latvia and Estonia will deal more on those issues. And now we'll move on to the real practices in our foreign countries. Let me now give the floor to our Estonian guest, Alan Alakula, head of Tallinn's European Union office. He's going to speak about the international perspective of fare-free public transport.
Thank you. And first of all, I would like to congratulate my Lithuanian friends, Seimas committee, and Marius Markevicius personally for this arranging this party today. I can tell you are not alone in this. I attended a meeting of French Senate committee in June in discussing a report on free public transport in France. You know, there is an extensive debate in Paris, but nationwide also in France. So it's and similar debates are ongoing widely in Germany, in lands, but on federal level as well. So it's not so unique as it may seem. Well, I start still from a general perspective of Tallinn before going to international for orientation. Tallinn size is slightly smaller what is Vilnius. However, continuously the number of population is increasing. Estonian population declined as well in last 30 years, but we still remain smaller. What Lithuania is territories, Estonian nation, Estonia is smaller. What is Lithuania and the territory of the city is 160 square kilometers, which means it's relatively low density of Tallinn. And the national and municipal budgets proportion is like 10 to 11, so no, it's a proportion where it indicates how the city relates to the national budget. Public transport general volume is 3 modes: tram, bus, tram and trolleybus, 600 units continuously operating. The public transport budget in the city reaches nearly or nears to 70 million annually, and it has seen a meaningful increase since start of free public transport. In 2012, a year before the free public transport, it has been 53 millions. So the increase has been much quicker compared to the general increase of the municipal budget. So it has been clearly prioritized in the city funding. The cost or the price tag of free public transport for Tallinn has been counted on basis of 2012. The lost ticket revenue was 12 million a year. And so the start was 1st of January 2013, and from the same year later, the commuter trains, in fact all trains, were also attached to the scheme. So in the city limits for city residents, all trains are also involved to the free public transport offer. Before free public transport was implemented, there was a basket of measures to accompany it. politically most sensitive was expansion of exclusive bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes throughout the city center. It was a radical redistribution of street space in a city center. It became possible because of the free public transport decision was made. It has been interpreted by municipality like a priority, wider priority to public transport, not only to eliminate the ticket cost, but prioritize public transport, and bus lanes were really made throughout the city center. And the second politically sensitive issue was also increase and severe increase of the parking tariffs. It has been done in 2 phases, but now we reached the level actually more expensive what is in Riga. I would say anywhere in Europe, I know at least. In Old Town, around the clock, 24/7 is parking tariff 6 euros per hour. And in wide central area, let's say walking distance from the center to the margins of the paid parking area, about 15 minutes walk on each direction, is tariff is 4.8 euros. As well, pretty high. How it relates to free public transport is that in communication, free public transport has been strongly used as a compensatory measure. It was said you can't complain on parking tariff as we have a free and reliable public service alternative. You are not obliged to come with your private car. And this is how the public transport comes to the table. The objectives for free public transport in Tallinn were possibly different what they are in other places. And I would say every municipality or every region or nation have to find its own priorities, and they differ depending on the size, on the socioeconomic conditions, on the landscape, climate situation. But in Tallinn, definitely the priority was socioeconomic. It was late phase of the previous late global crisis. The purchasing power was declined to extent when our survey started to indicate that the ticket cost became a major barrier for using public transport. It has been always on high positions, but it became the first place, and it became evident something had to be done. So providing mobility for all was a major concern. And it has been also simultaneously presumed that free public transport can stimulate local economy by stimulating consumption of local goods and services. People go out more on evenings, on weekends. If previous speakers said that on evenings the public transport is empty, I would say in Tallinn this picture has been changed slightly. And on the evenings, indeed, from city center, we can see there are people. And there are people going or returning from city center, from entertainment restaurants. They went to consume, they went to spend money, and this is something what adds to local economy. And only on the third category, or as a third objective in Tallinn, became what can be related to the climate. It's to contain traffic in the city center. And as I already explained, mostly thanks to the increase of parking tariffs, but also the distribution of the street space for the bus lanes mostly, at the expense of reducing of street parking places as well. Some decline of the car traffic has been achieved in the city center, and it has been set as an objective. The answer how it was funded on the city or municipal level was stimulating of registration of place of living. The free service was provided for, or is provided for, residents only. Thus, it stimulates actual residents who lived a long time or arrived recently for living in Tallinn, they have a strong reason to register as a place of living. Otherwise, the taxes went or were going to elsewhere. But thanks to an increase of taxpayers' number, city budget, the hole in the city budget, which emerged from the lost ticket revenue, it has been covered by ultra-conservative estimate at least twice as much. So in fact, city budget earned from the implementation of free public transport. And this is also an answer which explains how it became possible to invest to the service, how to improve the service. The additional inflow of taxpayers is the answer. From the mobility side, the figures are no, let's say not big. Increase of the usage in Tallinn city is about 10%. It occurred in the first year, and more or less it remained on the same, so we don't see continuous increase anymore. The low increase explained partly with the fact that 65 plus population traveled full free already before, and the students' discount rate was more than twice. So for students as well, there was no big affordability issue. So two major passenger groups did not experience affordability issue before, but still 10% increase remains, let's say it's more modest what we expected. We expected slightly bigger increase. And in traffic wise, as I said, in city center, some decline has been achieved, but around the pay parking area, people cruising in search of free parking place, the traffic slightly increased. From the last year, July, from mid of last year, the experience of Tallinn, the success of Tallinn, provoked national government to provide free public bus in a regional bus network, also free for everybody. Basically, it was said, it was political pressure on the government demanding that why Tallinners, which are not the poorest ones, can have it, and why not in rural areas. And as a result, it has been left optional for a county, for municipalities, unions in counties, and so 11 counties opted for free public transport to everybody, and 4 counties opted to continue partly free public transport. So full free counties still by population and by territory are in last majority. In half or semi-free counties, the ride was made free also for everybody from age 63 plus and below 19. So also major groups are free, even in the counties what we call semi-free. And as a result, and in counties, the increase or the impact has been bigger. The first 12 months conclusion is in total is about 30% increase, which is meaningful in the context of the long-term previous decline of the rural bus network usage. Slightly, suddenly in 1 year occurred a 30% increase, which is an answer for skeptics who say that, oh, nobody needs it, and then there are a lot of others and other priorities, which might be true. The network density is not enough, accessibility is not sufficient, but definitely the price, just the price made the difference as well. Having said that, also this increase, however, includes some additions to the volume. So the network has been, or the offer has been increased slightly as well. So it's not only thanks to price. The network has been adjusted, but also the volume has been slightly increased. And now it's about the international perspective. The European free public transport country, the main country has been for a long France. The smallest towns in France are continuously having it already from the mid of 1970s. However, the small municipalities. The new wave is relatively recent, bringing to the club bigger cities like Aubagne, which has been satellite of Marseille metropolis, joined 2009, year 2009, and Dunkirk started it only from last year, September, in full scale. And as I said, Dunkirk is biggest now. In France, by the way, the free public transport cities will come together and have a conference in September. So this includes as well, of course, Paris, where the mayor proposed the free public transport as a main election issue for the next year local elections. And as a part of this campaign in Paris already, the elderly groups, some elderly groups have been already provided free ride. And Berlin is also active. As a last, from international perspective and from European perspective, I would name Luxembourg, of course, Luxembourg state, which committed and decided to start full free public transport for everybody from next year, March. And it's going further compared to Estonia. However, Estonia continues and remains to call himself first free public transport nation, but Luxembourg is going further. The regime will include everything, literally every public transport except trains, first class travel in trains, which is mostly international travelers, and the flights, but everything internal, all modes of transport will be free. So the Luxembourg will be let's say the ultimate free public transport experience in country. And basically that's it, and I hope very much for a discussion.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting us with a situation in Estonia and with the international context. We also have another guest from Estonia, Ms. Merli Alikivi, product manager at the Tallinn Linna Transport, and she's going to speak about the operator's view to fare free public transport. And I guess we will hear very specific, very concrete proposals as to what has been made.
As it was said, my name is Merli Alikivi. I work for Tallinna Linna Transporti AS, which is a public transport service provider in the city of Tallinn. I work there as a project manager, and today I'm going to give you an operator's view of free public transport. So firstly, I would like to outline some important facts about us. Tallinna Linna Transporti AS started its operation half a year before than when the free public transport was launched, which was in the summer of 2012. And the predecessors of our company were two city-owned companies, which were called Tallinn Bus Company and Tallinn Tram and Trolleybus Company. From 2012 to 2019, we and one other private company have provided public transport on the basis of contract with Tallinn Transport Department. Since February 2019, Tallinna Linna Transporti AS is fully responsible for providing public transportation service in Tallinn. Our main field of activity is to provide public transport by buses, trolleybuses and trams. As of our site activities are vehicle technical inspection. We provide vehicle technical inspection, car wash, in-service training for bus and tram drivers, and we rent out some of our territory. As of July 2019, the number of employees is 1,922, and that includes almost about 1,000 bus drivers, 97 trolley bus drivers, and 133 tram drivers. And in 2018, we carried 132 million passengers, and our vehicles ran by 29.4 million line kilometers. So I will continue with the start of free public transport, what was the situation before and afterwards. And on the first figure, you can see how many times passengers used public transport in 2012 and afterwards. And I will draw your attention to the fact that passengers using our service and our predecessors' service is summed up in 2012, yes. And the overall number is bigger because, as I mentioned before, there was one other private company besides us. So, as you can see, there was a jump in the number of the passengers, and overall there was increase about 11 millions, and for us it was 7 millions. And after the start of free public transport, the number of passengers has not changed so drastically anymore. The second graph shows changes in the number of vehicles and drivers. As you can see, there is an increase in both numbers, but as it was anticipated that the number of passengers will increase, then City of Tallinn changed its order for us, so we had to put more vehicles on the lines and therefore have more drivers also. And here you can see how many line kilometers and routes were run by our vehicles in 2012 and afterwards. The orders we have received have changed over time, but have never fallen below 2012 level. And if you look at 2013, you see that instead of 64 lines, we serviced 3 lines more. And instead of 26.4 million line kilometers, we serviced 1.5 million line kilometers more. And behind these numbers, the travel intervals were tightened, and we put more buses on the lines, including more articulated buses. Afterwards, the order from the city have been adjusted on the basis of need, but overall the order for us has gone up. On this slide, you can see how people have answered about their way of movement in 2011, in 2013, in 2014, in 2015, 17 and 18. And from a longer comparison, the share of public transport users increased significantly in 2015, but it started from 2013. But overall, the usage has started to fall, but have not reached to the same level as it was in 2013. And based on the service, satisfaction with the organization of public transport has risen over the years. That is, the quality of the service has not diminished for citizens, and we have been able to improve the experience. And on this slide, you can see how the score last year, 4.11, has turned out and what questions were asked from the people. And in 2018, 83% of respondents answered that they are completely and quite satisfied. And only 6% of respondents answered that they are quite or they are dissatisfied, sorry. And based on the survey on 2018, free public transport motivates 61% of the respondents to use public transportation more. And the most important thing for the users is adherence to the timetable, and following are the cleanliness of the vehicle and suitable driving intervals. 88% of people want to get the information in real time. And the overall satisfaction score for us was 4.15 out of 5. So basically, the biggest change for us was that we had to service more lines, but it was only 3 lines more. And we had to put more vehicles on routes, including more articulated buses. Ticket validators were installed into our vehicles, and there was increase in the number of passengers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merli. Concrete and to the point presentation. Ir kitas mūsų pranešėjas.
Our next speaker brings his Latvian experience. Please change the slides. I give the floor to Mr. Andrejs Reshetnikovs, Deputy Mayor of Rezekne City Council, and he will be speaking about fare-free public transport and Rezekne's experience. Please turn on your mic.
Добрый день, коллеги. Я очень...
Good morning, colleagues. I thank the organizers of the conference for the honor that has been given to me to speak here, and I will try to be as brief as possible. Rezekne is a town. It's a rather small town with 30,500 inhabitants and 17.5 square kilometers in area. It was established in 1285. It is on 7 hills, actually situated on 7 hills, so all the roads lead to our town. Our party won the elections in 2009. And we have 13 members in the council, and therefore we feel stable, and we feel that our electorate support us. In 2009, we made a target of making Rezekne a very tidy town and to make it reach European level and to make life conditions comfortable there. Public transport in our town is one of the aspects which ensures comfortable conditions of living. Before 2012, we had a private carrier, and therefore there was some experience of cooperation between the municipality and private carriers. After the end of the contract with this private carrier, we decided not to continue it, and we organized our municipal transport that runs from 2012. We changed the vehicles in our park, and we have 4 electrical vehicles. The average age of our buses is 2 years. And since we made a target to make our town a comfortable town, in 10 years we have increased social benefits. We have carried out certain projects in the area of culture. And now we have a very good concert hall with a very good acoustics. We have issued many grants for the social area, and gradually we had applied certain bonuses. First, we had 50% discount in buying monthly ride. Later on, we had 100% discount for people aged 75 plus. We saw that when selling those tickets, the income is decreasing, and we had 85% of grants and 15% of income from selling tickets. We made some calculations that if public transport is fare-free for people in the age of group of 60 plus, we will need a bigger grants. Later on, since the 1st of April 2017, we decided to have free public transport for all the residents of the town. This actually led to the increase of passengers, and interestingly, that those who used cars, they continued to use personal cars, and those who use bicycles continued to do that. Our transport is more accessible for those with low incomes, pensioners, people with disabilities, and diseased people, because all our buses are fitted for people with disabilities. And this segment of the population of our city made the increase in the general flow of passengers. School pupils actually was the group that saw the increase in the use of public transport. And school pupils can move from one point to another point by using free public transport. It made their travel more comfortable. And we're very happy about taking this decision. We have not been disappointed. Certainly, if compared to 2016, was rather costly. In 2016, we had many more grants, and now the grants have decreased, and fare-free public transport costs 3% of our town budget. This is related not only to comfortable living, but it is also a way of solving social problems. An average family that owns a car and has one child spends approximately €50 on transport if they use free public transport. And we've noticed that the need to pay social benefits for people decreased. The social benefits sometimes were no longer claimed. For example, when people had some financial benefits, they have no possibilities to have cash. Their utilities are being paid and their public transport is being paid. And the only problem is that this is a load and a heavy load for the town budget. We pay taxes certainly. And we pay grants. So this was a brief introduction. If you are interested in some more precise details, I have left some information near this hall, and you will be able to approach me during the coffee break, and you can approach. And now we will have a Lithuanian calculations. Well, we have made a project which was related to the map of a town dweller. It has a chip installed, so those who have declared their residence in the town have this town card, and they actually use this card for public transport. Now, before the coffee break, we will have the last presentation by Mr. Liutauras Toškus. He is a member of the City Municipality Council and member of the Supervisory Board of the private company Vilnius viešasis transportas. So the floor is yours, Mr. Toškus.
Gal tik tai patikslinsiu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm no longer a member of the Municipal Council. I was a member of the Municipal Council in the previous term of office. But I have worked in the city planning department. And one of the areas that I looked into much deeper was public transport. When I received the invitation to participate and to make a speech in this conference, I have a few doubts, to tell the truth. All major cities have their own sustainable mobility plans. Municipal councils have adopted those plans. The government have approved of them. Well, such plans have not provided for the fare-free transport, so everyone might wonder, why should we talk about fare-free public transport when this thing has not been included in the sustainable mobility plans? So it seems that we are coming back to the same issue. Have we implemented everything? Or maybe that sustainable development plan is too expensive, or maybe we need more expensive solutions. In fact, I believe those discussions as to the fare-free transport is concerned are a bit out of context. I believe that the upcoming elections to the parliament is a very good timing for debating such issue. But fare-free public transport is similar to other things that have been offered by politicians free of charge. And those things that are free of charge are usually very attractive for the electorate. Well, I believe that if you have a public survey as to whether the residents want a public free transport, we would all guess what answers we could receive. Everyone are willing to have fair free public transport. Well, we have listened to many presentations, we have heard about the studies that have been carried out, and all they say and demonstrate one thing. Fair free public transport does not promote sustainable mobility. It might be a means to make people to stop using their private cars. The experience of other countries shows that people, instead of using bicycles or instead of walking, might opt for a fare free public transport. Well, since I was given some more minutes, I will provide you more precisely with the context of the Vilnius city, and I will tell you about some arguments why fare-free public transport in Vilnius would be a thing of maybe irresponsible policy. Well, it seems that Lithuania is unique in that it has been constantly engaged in looking for a panacea rather than addressing the problem. This figure shows the debt of the Vilnius city, and it is huge. Currently, due to the lack of public municipal kindergartens, many residents are made to take their kids to private daycare centers. They receive certain compensations, and the municipality suffers huge costs. For Vilnius, it cost 6.5 million euros in 2017. There is yet another important thing when it comes to Vilnius. In secondary schools, there are schools which have double shifts, which means that we have quite a huge number of school children who have classes in the second shift. We also have to look at the floor area per one student. And if we compare this floor area in schools per school children, we would see that Vilnius has the smallest floor area for the school children in comparison to other municipalities. And the financing to Vilnius secondary schools is the lowest too. Well, another question is whether we have made everything when it comes to our pavement, when it comes to our parks, when it comes to our infrastructure. Have we done everything? If we looked at the appropriations of Vilnius municipality in 2018, look at the first column. The first column shows the expected revenue from the ticket. It will account for 30 million euros. The blue column on the right side shows how much the municipality will have to add to compensate for the public transport costs. Well, I looked at the situation in Rezekne. The representative said that it costs 3% from the budget, while in Lithuania this sum is much higher. If we looked at the appropriations of the municipality to culture, to physical training and sport, we would see that these appropriations are very high. So in order to ensure free public transport, we have to take some amount from other fields. These figures shows the debt of the Vilnius municipality to the company providing public transport services. So, as you have seen, the Vilnius municipality is still indebted to the public transport carrier. If we looked at the recent years, here you see that the debt was gradually reducing because the economy was growing and the municipality won certain cases in the courts. They received certain appropriations from the government and managed to pay their debts. Here you see the situation in 2016 and 2017. It seemed that at one time the company received lots of money, and it seems that the company is not a stable one because it either does not have money at all to cover the needs or has money in excess. Well, we have already heard about the examples from Tallinn. My slide is also about the Tallinn's population growth since 2004. I have noted that in the first 2 years from the introduction of fare-free public transport in Tallinn, the number of residents who claimed their residence with Tallinn increased by 14,000. While in the year 2012, the figure rose by 4,000. So we can only imagine how those figures would rise in the city of Vilnius. We have seen from the presentation of our Tallinn colleague the population, 1,000 people of Tallinn's residents generate approximately 1 million euros, and with the help of the fare-free public transport tickets, they collected 12 million euros, while in the case of Vilnius city, 1,000 residents would bring approximately 375,000 euros. So differently from Tallinn, if you have remember, where 1,000 residents brought 1 million euros. So it seems that Vilnius would not be able to bring all the money that are necessary. In order to ensure fare-free public transport, we would need additional millions. And also, the compensation for the private kindergarten is a more important incentive for parents to claim their residence in Vilnius rather than to use public transport, because the compensation for a family amounts to 100 euros. Well, do we have the possibility to have all this increase in public transport users? If we are to offer public transport services for free, we would have to ensure that we have enough buses. We have calculated that in the peak hours, the number of passengers increase by 86% in comparison to the number of passengers during the day, while this figure in the evening peak hours increases by 79%. So it seems that we do not have sufficient infrastructure for the transportation of passengers. Now, one might wonder whether we would be able to make our passengers, people to stop using personal cars and shift to public transport. Well, first and foremost, we have to ensure quality. Before introducing fare-free transport in Tallinn, the city carried out an analysis and looked at the cost and benefit analysis, while in Lithuania this has not been done. Also, we have to ensure that public transport is fast, and we also have to ensure that this transport is frequent. So quality and frequency depends on the provider of services, while the speed of the public transport depends totally on the infrastructure. So it seems that first and foremost, we have to make sure that we have proper infrastructure so that public transport functions fast and frequently. People who use their private cars say that it is more convenient for them to use their private cars. It is more comfortable to use their private car. They have the possibility to park their car. But, well, the only thing that people said was, well, maybe, yes, it is cheaper to travel in a personal car when people travel not by one, but, for example, when there are two passengers in a private car. When it comes to the efficiency of public transport, I'd like to draw your attention to one fact. This figure has been taken from the Sustainable Mobility Plan. It has been estimated that majority of bus stops are not efficient. Also, frequency is not enough. People have to wait for almost a quarter of an hour for a bus to come. While in Tallinn, only 7% of bus stops are inefficient. Well, I don't think that we could, transport the experience of Tallinn directly to Vilnius. Because I don't think that the situations are similar. So it seems that we don't have sufficient infrastructure. So it seems that those areas that are less densely populated will not receive any benefit. Well, depending on the studies, data is of course different. It has been mentioned that around the city center, the number of cars has increased, but according to other studies, I have noticed that the number of cars remained the same. But we also heard that the city of Tallinn had to increase the number of routes in Tallinn. But the studies have also shown that the number of people who used to take short distances on foot has reduced. It is obvious that when it comes to sustainable mobility, fare-free public transport is not efficient. But it has also been mentioned that the number of people going to the city center in cars has reduced. But I believe that this has to do with the increased price for the car park. Many might wonder whether fare-free public transport will maintain the same quality. Many people complain that quality is not good, but it would be needless to say that the quality would not improve. I wonder whether what people thought about the quality of public transport in Tallinn. When it comes to conclusions, I believe that we should not talk about fare-free public transport in isolation from the entire context of the city. First and foremost, we need to carry out the cost-benefit analysis to see how the public transport, which is free of charge, will pay off in the long-term perspective. Well, it is obvious that for some people, fare-free public transport would be a very good idea because they cannot afford public transport. But we have to ensure to address such problems as appropriate number of transports for people, sufficient number of lanes for buses, quality, frequency, speed of the transport are all the issues that must be addressed. Well, some people say that employers should cover the costs of public transport because there are companies that cover the costs for the fuel. So we should, I guess, promote employers to cover the cost of public transport. Maybe this, well, do I have some time? Not much? Okay, I still have 2 minutes. Well, I looked into the proposals to introduce fare free public transport, and I got the impression that whether this free ride is proposed by the liberal approach supporters or by the people who promote Marxist-Leninist approach. Some people in Brussels believe that fare-free public transport is just a matter of politics, because such policy should be ensured to people. Latvia's example has showed that, well, it is reasonable to improve the situation of those people who are less prosperous. But I believe that we have to define the responsibility of the developers in developing the territory of the city. Well, we can differentiate between the price of the ticket. We know that the number of passengers during the peak hours increases. So we simply can reduce the price for the ticket for a certain time of the day, so that people could opt for the public transport rather than use their private cars. Well, when it comes to rural areas, it would be useful, I believe, to introduce fare-free public transport in rural areas, because this would help address social issues. So we have to think of certain incentives for people who stop using their private cars and opt for public transport. So we have to address the problem at the roots of the problem rather than addressing the consequences. Money can solve everything, but we also have to know that the municipality is the body that can help address many problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoškus. Well, your presentation was rather controversial, and actually it might give food for thought and for discussion. Now we're going on a coffee break, and we will return at 12:10. Well, actually, when we speak about benefits, they are not economic, but rather social. You spoke about financial means. Benefit is not only the economic, and it does not only lie in numbers, but it is a social and economic aspect that has to be taken into account. Now, colleagues, we will come back in 12:10. Please prepare your questions for the discussion and prepare your remarks as well. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good coffee break. There are many of you. It is surprising, so the topic is interesting. Now let us start the discussion. We will not have any slides now. Now I invite you to prepare some questions or your remarks. I have some remarks. I have understood from some of the presentations, because some speak about the pure financial side, while others spoke about socio-economic aspect. We have to have a common denominator.
будут основываться на одном подходе, например, экономический подход, или только бухгалтерский подход.
So we have to have this because we have some kind of miscommunication here. We have to find the common point of departure. Another thing that I've seen is that you can strive at sustainable mobility by using transport, but some unexpected consequences might occur when, for example, pedestrians or people who go on foot for short distances use transport, public transport. So we need to speak about comprehensive means, not only about public transport, but other things as well, and other modes of travel as well. Sustainable mobility is that we don't travel at all. It is related to urban planning. Sustainable urban planning is that when the city is planned in the way that no travel is needed at all. So let us begin the discussion.
A representative to respond or to extend discussions which were started by a representative of Vilnius. Would you like to start?
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. I would start from remark to Mr. Stoškus, the last speech in last session. No, we have seen it in Estonia, in Tallinn, and elsewhere where I spoke about free public transport. It's always very easy to bring and to invent and to showcase the reasons. Million knows why it's hard or it's impossible to do. It's always easier. My advice, however, I'm not in position to gospel it here, but my no, let's say, our experience is that it's much more effective to concentrate on how it can be done, how it can be achieved. No, would be much more productive. In regard of there was mentioned that this is a rather left-leaning policy, rather mostly propagated by center-left and left parties from Europe and worldwide as well. There can be brought quite a number of cases where it has been implemented in center-right and right-wing city municipal governments as well. So it does not. Let's say it's politically complex, and all sides of the spectrum can find their reasons to do it. In addition to my own presentation, I would like to say that with arrival of Luxembourg to the Free Public Transport Club in European Union Council, there will be 2 member states soon, from next year March, exercising it on national level, which means the issue will arrive to the European Union radar. So far, it has been very slightly dealt. There have been some surveys made which are actually indicating and very strongly confirming there is a strong expectation from European population for free public transport. 2014 Eurobarometer survey indicates that in the cities the cost of ticket is a major issue, and particularly in the richest member states. And in October, Tallinn representation in Brussels will collect together the capitals of European Union who are interested from free public transport, and we will involve also the DG Move and probably Director General will be already in this discussion table. So it on 7th of October, yes, in Brussels. So the issue nears to the EU level as well. which is thanks to coming of the Luxembourg mostly. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. Ir pirmoji ranka man iš kairės, prašau prisistatykite. Jeigu klausėte, sakykite.
The first hand on my left, please introduce yourself. I'm Marius Kučinskas. I'm a simple participant. I just wanted to give my remarks. We can find a compromise here. Just imagine if we had... I don't think that fair, free public transport will promote people changing from cars to buses, but we can promote people not using their cars, personal cars, and different ministries, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, Communications and Transport and Finance could actually communicate and cooperate in this area. For example, if a person sells his personal car, public transport can be made for free to this person if he does not buy a new car for the first 2 years. So this would be a good incentive for reducing the number of cars. Now, concerning the car parking, on the national level, we could introduce parking taxes not only in the center, in all the cities and towns in Lithuania. This is also a very good solution, and actually income from this could be used, could be put into a certain fund. And this could be used this money could be used in real time, so that no strong confrontation is found with sustainable mobility. And this fund could be used for granting people financially when a personal car is sold. A program on people refusing their cars would be very efficient, I believe. This financial model would be a part of this comprehensive system. It would help to resolve the transport problem. This would reduce the number of cars. For example, you say no to your car, to your personal car, and you get the grant from the state. And this money comes from car parking fees. And different social groups should be considered, including families with children and with no children. This is a very comprehensive and complex issue. And if the ministries are really willing, so one of the three ministries, the Ministry of Environment, Communication and Finance, are willing to cooperate, they could draft a law on this. If there's a will, there's a way. The representatives from the ministries, I believe, have understood you. Maybe Marius Markevičius would like to make a remark. He's a real initiator of sustainable mobility. He's an enthusiast. Well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody, those who made presentations and those who helped organize this event. I believe that you have done a great job, and this discussion will be just the beginning on changing this old-fashioned system in the city. Free public transport could be a pretext to have a different view on many things. I have many questions for many presenters, for representatives of the ministry. He showed the statistics that the situation is deteriorating. And my question is what the ministry is doing on reversing the situation. There is a lack of information. Is the ministry doing something, because cities sometimes say, well, yes, we want you, what are you driving at? Is it pollution? Well, actually, this is a comprehensive issue, traveling habits, pollution, because traveling habits have to change. People who find it more comfortable to travel by cars will travel by cars, but cities very often say that this is financially not cost-effective to introduce fare-free public transport. Well, sometimes we don't reach a joint solution. From the presentations that I've heard, the greatest challenge is that the increasing volume of passengers should not be achieved at the cost of pedestrians or cyclists. For example, Tallinn introduced taxes and fees in the city center. Or maybe outside the city center, the fees are not that high. Therefore, this encourages the use of cars outside the city center. And maybe speed is the important factor which actually influences the choice of travel for people. So some soft measures that don't require a lot of investment could be introduced. For example, inviting people to try something out. And if, for example, a passenger sees that the speed is rather slow, he or she would not change his or her habits. This is more important for us compared to our neighbors. The use of cars in Lithuania, we are actually front runners here. For example, in Estonia, the use of cars is 84%, 75% in Latvia. Traveling by trains in Lithuania is very bad. Cities cannot address these issues on their own, so the help of different ministries is needed, as well as cooperation. So I would like to discuss that in more detail. So I'm looking at the representatives of the ministries. Please turn on the microphone. Actually, we are engaging in communication with municipalities. We are aiming at the improvement of quality of buses, for example, to have newer vehicles. GPS model is being introduced in all the buses, and it allows all the passengers to have early planning of journeys. For example, when one reaches point B, the availability of buses is uncertain. So this adds the sense of quality to your travel. So if you know that you will reach C from A through B in a comfortable way, and knowing that is a very good way, a very good solution. So we are working on this. Concerning the proposal by Marius, it is an interesting proposal. It is worth considering. I think that a high political level is needed here, and this proposal needs to be made there. So we have to see the reaction of our colleagues, and we will see what can be done in this area. As Mr. Markevičius has noted, this is a really long-term project. It has to be planned and later on implemented, but you have to plan it in advance. Before giving the floor to Kristina Kaučė, I wonder whether different ministries have the responsibility for sustainable mobility. Well, this is a very comprehensive issue. It is not clear which ministry is responsible for what. We have a climate change plan, and it is not. And strategic planning is prerogative of the ministries. Okay, now the next speaker. Well, I cannot answer this question because the colleague who was not able to participate today is better aware of the situation. I think that that Dr. Kristina Kaučė could answer this question. Well, I've noted a lot of remarks. Well, concerning the ministries, this is not the Ministry of Communication and Finance, because the Ministry of Environment is also engaged in that. So I think that in the 21st century, the speed of travel is not a target which cannot be reached. This is a multidisciplinary and multisectorial issue. And we should not give the responsibility to one ministry. I showed you the illustrations that there is an attempt in Lithuania to look at this in a multisectoral way. There are considerations that, for example, in the Lithuanian national plan only speaks about Lithuanian development plan. And this development program is aimed at sustainable mobility, and this is not logical. And increasing sustainable mobility is actually increasing the number of accidents, the numbers of travels, and the numbers of injuries. And yes, we should not give one ministry the prerogative of sustainable mobility. Well, I've spoken in the Seimas on this topic before. This is not a new topic. It is an old discussion. We should not bring new ideas and put them on the table. And I think that sustainable development plans include differing recipes and ways out. The Netherlands are addressing the issues of using bubble gum, which is removed from the pavements. And actually, we have not reached this point in evolution, actually. It is very easy to find recipes and say that nobody is considering it. Actually, we have to follow our policy, and we have to look at the measures and see what the targets are. For example, in Vilnius, the number of travels by public transport is much higher than in Lithuania in general. It is Well, actually, people don't use public transport, not because of it being costly, but due to other reasons. And concerning what Marius has said, they are not very unbiased. If we take the area of our country and compare it to the area of Latvia and Estonia, we can see many differences here. So different numbers that you showed are out of context. And for example, to adopt a Seimas resolution on achieving one or another goal, this is not effective. Last year in Lithuania, over 100 strategies were established about climate, environment, rural development, and all of them have to have a certain common denominator. And actually, different people have different aims. So I believe that a part of recipes, and all the recipes are not bad examples. Latvian example is very inspiring. We have our own examples. We're not speaking about the things that are very important. We're just taking out certain measures out of context.
Maybe someone from the municipality, because I believe that this is a very local issue. Well, I don't know whether Tallinn expressed to get some support from the central government. Thank you. I'm not from the municipality. I'm from the Ministry of Environment. Today, we have heard very interesting presentations on the benefits of the fare-free public transport. We have also heard about the threats posed by the fare-free transport, because we heard that people driving personal cars might not be tempted to use public transport. Being a representative of the Ministry of Environment, we have to look at the end aim of this. First and foremost, we have to reduce the number of personal car drivers. According to the statistics, as Marius Markevičius has shown, the situation in Lithuania is rather poor. The Ministry of Environment is trying to adopt the pollution-reducing plan, and we intend to give certain support to municipalities which will try to reduce the flows of personal cars in city centers. It will not be a compulsory demand to ban personal cars in the city centers, but maybe the municipalities will be encouraged to introduce parking fees in city centers, in town centers, in rural centers as well. We have also provided for another means, that is to provide support to those residents who refuse to use their own car, and to provide financial support for using public transport, and to compensate for the public transport once the person has sold his private car. We have to ensure that there is political will, and we have in certain municipalities a political will to impose taxes on pollution from vehicles. We have to change the habits of people so that they acquired vehicles that pollute environment less. So we have to ensure that we do not only reduce the number of personal cars, but also reduce, have more cars that are less polluting. We have to make concrete steps. We have to ensure that parking in city centers is less attractive. Public transport has to be convenient, comfortable, and efficient. We should not be afraid of certain restrictions, but we have to take into account that there are certain social groups, some of which are rather vulnerable. We have introduced certain measures in the national plan for the reduction of air pollution. We have encouraged initiatives from the municipality. So, for example, that municipalities could put taxes, for example, in certain areas where transport flows. I have a question to one of the Estonian colleagues, any one of them. I wonder whether there was any significant impact on the pollution, on the quality of air after the introduction of the fare-free public transport. So has the pollution reduced? Has the number of, has the CO2 emissions reduced?
Previous question?
The answer is there is no hard data which can be linked to the decline of or to the free public transport. There is a decline of traffic, slight decline in city center, but let's say it has been not our objective. Tallinn, due to its landscape, we are flat land on the coast and size smaller of Vilnius slightly, so air is not really an issue. We are listed among the 10 world cities with the cleanest air. So air is not, but so I don't have figures and we don't have a proper statistics which can be related to free public transport.
Thank you. Aš tik turėčiau klausimą aplinkos.
I have a question for the representative of the environment, for the Minister of the Environment. According to your plan, do you think that we should get rid of the car-sharing initiatives, the ones that we have, the City B or other? So do you think it is sustainable to have car-sharing services? The support, according to the program, will be developed in several stages. During the first stage, the support will be provided to those people who acquire less polluting cars. Because we believe that we also consider the car-sharing services, but we have not included them in our plans. But maybe those services will be included in later plans. Maybe we could also think of compensating for those who, let's say, want to share cars. Andre, you wanted to make a remark, right? Dear colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to one important fact. The choice as to which mode of transport can be chosen in the family or by a resident depends on the way of living of that family or that resident. Transport adapts to the way of life of the family concerned. That's why one of the main means which could be applied by the municipalities is to offer a choice for our urban residents which way of transport they could use for commuting, to ensure that the questions are addressed. Well, I can't say that we must do this or that, because there is a conflict between convincing someone to change the car into the public transport or to make someone, to force someone use public transport. Those two things have a different effect on the mind of people. If we have a good proposal as to the public transport is concerned, the person might choose public transport. But if a person is not satisfied with public transport, he will choose his own car. For example, in our town, Rezekne, many people of working age live in the suburb of Rezekne. They live in remote areas, and those areas are not usually covered by public transport.
Kaip atvykti į darbą, atsiprašau, tai aišku, visi naudos.
So, when it comes to their traveling to work, they would usually choose their personal car rather than the public transport. If we repair pavements and all the public infrastructure, I believe that our citizens would choose to use either scooters or bicycles. We would thus reduce the number of car drivers and increase the number of passengers of public transport. So it is the transport that has to adapt to the way of living of one or another family.
Aš tai negaliu atsidžiaugti to,
I'm very happy to hear that we are talking about transport sustainability. When we established this commission, we believed that it is very important to have the discussions of the kind. We tend to argue between the two things when it comes to public administration and politics. Politics is different from public administration. But as our colleagues from Estonia mentioned, we can think of hundreds of reasons not to do anything in terms of public administration. But when it comes to politics, politics means that we have to believe in one or another vision. The vision might not be feasible in reality. Well, but we simply have to think of the objectives. We have to make sure that more and more people believe in one or another idea and thus miraculously change the situation. I remember we had a discussion as to making our higher education free of charge. We held the discussions which were as ardent as the discussions on fare free public transport. But the quality of education has not deteriorated just because it has become free of charge. Well, we are living in the 21st century. We face different challenges, but in this particular hall, during this particular discussion, we have to eliminate various myths. For example, well, in Lithuania, we believe that the bachelor's studies will be free of charge as of next year. It will cost approximately 17 million for the budget of Lithuania, but it will have long-term social implications. And those long-term implications overweight the financial implications. When it comes to Vilnius, fare-free public transport is a very important political issue. We talked that Vilnius still lacks some 30 million euros to introduce that. But, well, we should not look at this issue from the financial perspective. We should also take a look whether we will have enough passengers and whether we will ensure that those flows of passengers on public service increased. I know that the situation is rather old-fashioned, not only in Vilnius, but across other Lithuanian cities. Professor Kristina Gaučė said that it would be rather difficult to make people, well, to motivate people get out of their personal cars. Well, we saw the figures shown by Marius Markevičius. So, any increase in the passenger flows, I believe, will be on the account of drivers. Social mobility is a very important concept in socio-economic terms. Well, it might only seem from the very first sight that these are two different things. So it's not only a pensioner, a retired person, who is a winner from a free public transport. I believe that, for example, in Tallinn, an entrepreneur can take public service free of charge and deal with his business issues during the day and contribute to the success of his own business. So we should calculate that the public, free, fair public transport will bring many more benefits than just the money, let's say, for the municipality. I know that buses are usually taken by people from different social status. Some people are not considered as social. I'd like to respond, if I may. Kristina, first Kristina, then Liutauras Toškus. And please make sure that you turn on the microphone. Well, 91% of vehicles are in the context of Lithuania only. That's why in my presentation I showed that there are many more areas in Lithuania, for example, in Varėna, in Raseiniai, in Tauragė. So there are many territories where mobility should be understood not as not mobility as your right, but mobility as the right of each individual to receive quality services. Cities, well, you have mentioned about the entrepreneur on the buses in Tallinn transport. So I am also a businesswoman. I might also take public transport services. I believe benefits, for example, pensioners for single mothers would be a good idea, but I don't think we can talk about figures in different contexts. People are happy when a bus is traveling every 3 minutes. This is a service, and purveyors have to pay for that service, and people can afford to pay for that service. But there are areas in which people have their buses which operate only 2 or 3 times a week. Mr. Stoškus, the floor is yours. Thank you. It is always with great pleasure that I am listening to the arguments made by Kristina Gaučė. We have gathered here in one of the most important institutions of Lithuania. It is a political institution that requires a political comment, I guess. I understand that the ruling coalition in the Seimas has to make its mind as to what policy it is going to implement. When the tax reform was implemented, 1 million euros was allocated for other needs. I know that certain proposals will be made with regard to certain things which will be free of charge in the future, such as the one that had been mentioned with a higher education. Well, but you still have to answer whether you will be able to balance the state budget. You still have to answer this question. And there is yet another thing. What I personally believe is that there is a constant shifting of the burden from a polluter pays to those to subsidies who use less polluted transport. Well, it doesn't matter in which format we are dealing in. It might be transport, it might be energy sector. So Energy Institute, for example, says that the government could provide grants to those which do not pollute or to those which do not violate environmental requirements. So the EU policy is that the polluter pays. So those who violate those principles have to pay. Therefore, looking from this perspective, I cannot accept the proposals by the Minister of Environment to pay compensations to those who are buying new cars. So we have to think about reducing the number of cars. So it seems that we are trying to cover up the problem, and we are providing subsidies for new cars instead of reducing the number of cars. It seems that we are providing even better conditions for car users. The colleague mentioned that we have certain habits, and those habits reduce the quality of our life. For example, children cannot play in the streets because the pollution norms are too high in Lithuania, and transport is the major contributor to the pollution. We should not, therefore, remain complacent with the situation. The first thing that we have to do is to reduce the number of vehicles in our cities. I want the Minister of Environment to address the problems that exist in reality and to impose taxes on those which choose the solution which is not friendly to the environment. Thank you.
Dėkui.
I'd like to bring yet another aspect to our discussion. Lithuania has committed to reduce pollution by 9% by 2030. Our results, interim results, are absolutely opposite. So we know that the country will have to take radical measures because the incompliance might impose fines on Lithuania in millions or even billions of euros. So in this context, we still have to come up with a solution. What could be done? Well, it may be a fare, free public transport that could contribute to the reduction of pollution in the long run. So what are those three major things that should be invented? Well, I know that the tax on pollution from transport could be one thing, but what else? What else? This conference is also about the fact that fare-free public transport is among the means. So I know that the representative from the Environment Ministry wanted to contribute. Thank you. Well, you mentioned the objectives and plans of Lithuania, but yes, we do have to reduce the CO2 emissions by 2030. Although the transport is not included in that objective, I know that a new strategy is being drafted now. We are drafting the plan as to the reduction of 5 conventional pollutants in Lithuania. So while we do have those commitments, we have undertaken commitments, but the solution has to be a complex one. Complex measures, as Mr. Liutauras Toškus mentioned, we have to renew our transport fleet. So, for example, people should be encouraged to buy less polluting cars, because currently people in Lithuania buy more powerful car, which is not necessarily less polluting. Usually it's vice versa. So the ministry thinks that, for example, we could introduce, let's say, a 1,000 euro compensation for a person who sells his car and starts using a bicycle or a public transport. So we should think of some certain stages which could be implemented. We are also thinking about introducing certain sustainable mobility measures. As far as the polluting sectors are concerned and the commitments, so we should not think only about transport as a polluting area. We have to think about energy sector too, and to think about central heating efficiency. So, but of course, efficiency in energy sector is much better than in transport sector. Well, maybe free fare public transport could be one of the ways to ensure sustainable mobility and efficiency. Well, I agree that cost efficiency is a very important criteria. Public transport is much more economical to use than, let's say, your private car. But the state, in order to reduce the flows of cars, could provide support, provide financial support for the municipalities to manage the traffic flows and to impose taxes, for example, in city centers. And so that the municipalities could carry out the cost-benefit analysis of the measures that they are planning to introduce. So, well, public transport might be efficient, but I can't say that it is cost-effective. Well, the colleague, could you introduce yourself? Passenger Transport Association, Mr. Yakutis. The idea of a fare-free public transport is closely related to the reduction of air pollution. But in the program for the reduction of air pollution provides for certain measures that help people to purchase less polluting cars. Also, there are measures to put taxes on public transport because these transport means are polluting. For example, many of our public transport means are driven by diesel, and diesel is considered to be a polluting fuel. So, be it a public transport or a freight transport, the costs for the carrier would increase significantly. So if we want to encourage people to use public transport, but increase the costs for the use of public transport, we will not be able to achieve the objectives that we have set. People will use transport less because they won't be able to afford it. And I'm not talking only about the cities, I am talking also about the interurban transport as well. Also, the excise duty on diesel cars will increase in the future. But as I have mentioned, majority of public transport means are driven by diesel, which means that the operation costs for the carriers will increase too. People who have their personal cars do not use public transport. For example, one bus can carry from 40 to 50 buses, which is equal to the number of passengers in 10 to 12 or even more cars. So it seems, but we know we have to know which transport means is more polluting. I believe that taxes should be raised on vehicles depending on the pollution that they emit. I believe that public transport companies should not be imposed with new taxes, and it would then be possible to maintain the attractiveness of public transport when it comes to the price that the passengers have to pay. Well, we say that parking fees in Lithuania are very high, but I believe that if we had the same prices as the city of Tallinn has, the number of cars in the city center would reduce. We could offer people some car parks in the vicinity of the city center, so that they could leave their car in parking lots and take public transport to get to their destination. So there are many things that have to be taken note of. And we should address all the interrelated problems. And it seems that when we address the pollution issue, we do not encourage people to use public transport. Thank you. I have some remarks for the representatives of the Minister of Environment. My proposal to provide grants or compensations for the people who get rid of their cars, and to establish a fund that would collect the money from parking fees, is the task of the state rather than the municipality. I've heard from one municipality, from one member of one municipal council, that one or another legal act of Lithuania does not allow for the establishment of the fund that would collect parking fees. So the proposals that I have made, or that the ministry is proposing, is at the national level rather than the municipal level. So, which means that we have to establish a national fund to collect the money from the parking fees, and to use this fund to subsidize people who stop using their personal cars. At the same time, we have to improve transport infrastructure and to reduce the number of transport means on the road. Well, it might seem as an utopia at first, but I believe that these things could contribute to the objectives. But as I have mentioned, these proposals are intended for the government. Thank you. Well, I believe that the representatives of ministry have expressed their views. Well, but I hope that you are already concluding. Well, I believe the excise duty on diesel fuel is not on the plan. Let me assure you, so this will not be implemented in the nearest future. When it comes to the road fees, there will be certain provisions that will be amended when it comes to the freight transport, but not the public transport. So we will take account into the European standards rather than introduce our own. When it comes to the national fund, I believe this will be rather difficult to collect the money from the parking fees. I'm not sure whether it would be technically possible, but we also have yet another idea. If such a pollution tax on all vehicles is introduced, then those funds would be used to provide support for less polluting cars and for public transport and for car sharing services. So this is just on the plan, but I believe that we have to look how to implement sustainable mobility measures. And the very conclusion. Good afternoon. Today we are holding a very important conference on a very relevant topic. I am the head of the carriers company in Tauragė. My question is, well, to politicians. There might be some alternatives. There could be some subsidies provided for fuel, implementation, introduction of innovation, and many other things. Well, we do know that many carriers do not introduce innovations and do not renew their fleet because some of the proposals are not viable for those companies. I believe that there will be a breakthrough in the nearest future. I believe that we can talk a lot on this issue, but I have a question to Rezek now. Well, we have the EU regulation on public procurement. So how did you come to ensure the full operation of your company, having in mind the EU regulation on public procurement?
Yes, we made a purchase. Well, the results of the contest showed that a company has won and was willing to buy those buys. It was not in violation to the law on public procurement. Our representatives met them. They gave their requirement. We gave their requirements. Well, the question was about the service. How did you move from private to public services? Well, according to our legislation, we have a possibility to give this right to the municipal company. For example, if we make public procurement, we can have an agreement, and the municipal company has the right, exclusive right to use those cars, use those vehicles. Well, I don't know. Well, it is related to the legislation of the Republic. This was not a problem to our municipality, actually. Mr. Stoškus, I will make a remark. Our policy in terms of fare-free public transport is not in conflict with environment protection. Our cars, vehicles are new, buses are new, they're electrically run. Just imagine a young family with a child or with children, and those children need to be brought to school and then back to different clubs. And in this case, this is just a lifestyle of a certain family. This is not a habit. These are two different things. This is a lifestyle, not a habit. And in this case, and I have no right to promote this family to change their habit or their lifestyle.
directive issue. Now, before it was implemented in Tallinn, Estonia had a commissioner responsible for transport at the EU Commission, and it was then opposing. He was representing party opposing to the free public transport. You can believe that everything possible has been looked for to find counter arguments on European level as well. Nothing has been found, and the same is confirmed by the fact there is around 70 municipalities, at least in EU, in member states, who are doing it. So it has been searched heavily, but there is no contradiction with EU laws.
Ir jau visiškai apibendrinimui.
And now, making a conclusion, well, don't raise new topics, just to round it up. Mindaugas Augustaitis from the transport sector of a municipality. I don't know whether this question is correct. Well, sustainable mobility can be encouraged by free public transport. But this is the socio-economic aspect, because the majority of travels in cities, towns, and around them are made by personal cars. And we are dealing here with the reliability of this transport and safety. So this money should be devoted to this area. Well, the colleague mentioned, well, actually, the Lithuanian competition laws and Article 5 does not allow the municipality to carry on internal transactions for its companies. So public procurement for finding the carrier has to be made, and this is a challenge for us. And this is a challenge in our town. We have good examples of ensuring public interest in Vilnius, for example. In Šiauliai, many challenges were related to street tidying, and we had problems for public transport. We had a long-term contract, and after the termination of the contract, we lost the carrier. I think that this issue should be raised in a different way. Not about introducing the free public transport, but we have to speak about improving quality of public transport. And we have to speak about the distance of access to public transport. And the route and lane planning actually is made in advance. In our country, this is rather chaotic. So that was my point. Thank you. Now it is time for conclusions. Tomas Tomilinas will help me to round everything up. I think that the provocative question did not convince us and me. The arguments by Mr. Stoškus are very convincing, but this question actually incited a political discussion. And this is the fact. And we cannot involve the public in the discussion of different topics. We as experts understand the very essential and basic things of that. And I think that this is not the level of discussion that society should be involved in. I believe that we should concentrate political debate around this topic. And even if this decision was not adopted, many other problems of sustainable development could be resolved, and that would help us move forward. To my mind, well, we have this progress, we see this progress. And Mr. Stoškus said a very good remark that employers could make incentives for their employees and cover public transport costs. Well, small steps are being taken. Well, the idea by Dr. Goche on the coordination of a different strategy actually was the reason for the establishment of our commission, because we see different timetables, different strategies that are adopted at different times, and they don't have a common denominator. And detailed strategy discussion cannot always involve all the public. And other topics might be chosen for public discussion. We just were interested in hearing how the system works in Tallinn and in Latvia. Well, actually, I've understood that every city and every town and every country has its own reasons for introducing a fare-free public transport. And here, we should clearly name the reasons for the introduction of that. We're not speaking about clean energy or climate change. Actually, we care about other things. We are speaking about pollution, about clean energy and taxes. But we need to clear things out for ourselves. What are the main targets? Well, fare-free public transport could be considered a good measure. And so far I have not answered a question whether it should be introduced in Lithuania. But actually, we should not forget the context of sustainable mobility. And as a member of the Seimas, I ask whether we have the plan of the implementation of the sustainable mobility strategy. Well, I think that this is a well-discussed plan. Well, this is a way to critically discuss some points in all this general matter. And in the area of energy, I remember a lot of discussions and a lot of arguments on support to the Center of Energy, and the public understood companies like Fiat seem like a curse. So is it not the case that the ministries have their own visions, but the public and the Seimas, the parliament, are not well aware of different ideas that are being generated by different ministries? And actually, this can be counter-effective for us in terms of financial means. This could mean fines for us. So in this case, we have not proposed any clear plan of action or measures. But the ministries or the ministry responsible should discuss this idea further. And actually, vehicle pollution tax is something that was a novelty. But we had no explanation, and the public actually lacked the communication on that. We should focus at least on certain population groups. I believe that we have to reconsider this issue. We have to revise our strategy and the plan of implementation. Is it a final document? Well, on the level of municipalities, but we don't have this concluding document on the level of the ministry. And I think that this is a very important topic. We know in the area of energy, the level of clean energy is to be achieved. But in terms of sustainable mobility, we are actually lost. I think that fare-free public transport should be discussed in this context. Actually, we did not find a real solution, but the discussion was very interesting. I thank our guests from Estonia and Latvia. I also wanted to thank our interpreters. Thank you very much. Have a good day and safe journey home.